So while many parts of KwaZulu-Natal have suffered untold damage this week, the suburb of Phoenix received some special attention after video surfaced on social media showing residents carrying various weapons and setting up roadblocks. There were also unconfirmed reports of racial attacks and killings between Indians and Africans in that area. However, Police Minister Gabriel was at pains on Thursday to downplay those reports, insisting that the events were of criminal nature and not racial. To discuss this, we're joined by Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand and political analyst, Professor Sipho Sierpe. We're also joined by the head of campaigns at the Institute for Race Relations, Gabriel Crouse. A very good morning to you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time this morning. Professor Sierpe, let me start with you. I mean, the residents of Phoenix are really speaking about what's happened over the past week. They are saying at this very moment that they're not out of the woods yet. That's despite what Police Minister Gabriel had to say about the calm being restored, and they believe that they're still on knife's edge. What is it that we should be understanding about what's at play here, the criminal element that the police minister speaks of, and the racial, battles that we've seen play out even on the streets with with bodies on the streets and cars torched and armed communities?
Yeah, I think we would need to have a body count on who has actually died. And when you look at that, you'll find that it is largely Africans who have actually died. And your question is who had actually killed those people. And then we'll be able to determine whether there's a racial element. But at the same time, we must also understand that most of the businesses in that part of the world are owned by largely Indian and also white people. So if those people are being told that they should defend themselves, you are going to get a situation where most of them were armed, they have guns and all that, and they'll shoot people to defend their property. And this is where the state has actually failed the people of this country, not only in Phoenix, but in the rest of the country. We must also understand, as President Ramaphosa himself acknowledges, that they were taken off guard. But it is actually mostly nonsense, because we know, as a matter of fact, that week in, week out, day in, day out, there are protests in this country that are violent. We know of protests against the ESCOM, where every time you have those protests, they tend to be violent, you have a destruction of property. So this has become the norm in South Africa. So what has happened this time is that whereas this tended to be sporadic, happening in Guguletu, happening in Soweto, happening in Mafikeng, happening in the rest of the other parts of the country, what you had here was a sense of unhappiness with the outcome that led to President Zuma to be incarcerated. And that connected. And of course, in all protests, there will always be opportunistic elements. This is where the state should have anticipated this. But what the state has been busy with, it has been busy with infighting within the ANC. There's been more factional battles and no attempt to look at this. And also the state has been listening to the wrong people. When people warned that this is likely to happen, many of us who are analysts went out there saying, no, this is not going to happen, all is hunky-dory. And as a result, depending on those who the president listens to, there was a sense of ill-preparedness. And one must be happy that he has acknowledged that. But at the same time, it was the very same president not so long ago, instead of owning up to a sense of social and economic alienation that is actually felt in this country, was saying this is ethnic mobilization. Yesterday, he had to swallow his words to say, no, it came out as that. But how do you go in a public platform as a president and talk about ethnic mobilization, and only then retract when you are actually given facts? So it's very important that when we talk about this, let's have facts. And even when we talk about racial tensions in Phoenix, let us start talking about the body counts. Let us look at, almost go back and see how things evolved. And also go to the root causes of this, because we should not pretend that this is one protest. Protests happened, but the last point I want to make is that there are protests that are also engineered or even supported by those who are in power. If you take, for instance, the mayhem that occurred when the Supreme was removed, there was destruction of property. You didn't say the ANC saying, let us go and look for the culprits, the engineers and all. They accepted that there was righteous anger against Supra and he had to be removed. And when you do that, you give legitimacy to mayhem. So you cannot have it one way and the next time when it happens against you, you say you're not happy with it. For instance, we had the marches against Zuma Must Fall, and it was never considered to be what you call insurrection. It was seen as legitimate protest. So we need to start defining what we understand by legitimate protest. And yes, we must actually up our game in terms of our intelligence, which seems to be almost depleted of capacity. We must talk about the sense of alienation that people feel, especially young people. When you have 74% of black young people who are unemployed and unemployable, who are roaming the street with all the energy, and you are asking for trouble. And COSATU and other organizations have always said that we're sitting on a powder keg.
Let me bring Gabriel in the conversation. Gabriel, we heard the president yesterday addressing some reporters in KwaMashu on his visit to KwaZulu-Natal, speaking about ethnic mobilization, doing a U-turn on what he thought and believed to be ethnic mobilization, saying that, in fact, he erred in that judgment. Was what played out on the streets of Phoenix expected? Was it something that had been burning and brewing but simply not addressed?
As far as we can tell, the violence in Phoenix is much as Professor Sierpe has characterized it, based on people defending their property and looters coming for them, and the motivation is not racial, it's self-defense or criminality. That is not to say we have all the facts at our hands. I completely agree. We need to do more investigation to figure out what exactly happened there, and that is going to take serious police work, and I think it's probably going to take serious work from journalists as well, because the police capacity has been shown once again to be wanting. I think one thing worth noting about ethnic mobilization is that it's a conceptual struggle to find the difference between ethnicities and races. Once upon a time, people thought that races were biological units and ethnicities are social constructs. And then it was easy to keep ethnicities and races separate, although if you look in Europe, races were not characterized largely as white, but as Slav, Semite, Anglo-Saxon, Gaul, Aryan, La Razza Italian, Romana, and so on. And all of those races or ethnicities, whichever word you prefer, were associated with fascist movements. This is just to say, now that we have the biological sense to know that races are social constructs too, ethnic mobilization and racial mobilization are two words for the same thing. Insofar as we can find any evidence of racial mobilization, it's largely through Zuma supporters and his children who said that, and Zuma himself, who said that his sentencing was an apartheid type thing, who said that white monopoly capital was to blame for this, and that the law is too Western for South Africans to submit themselves before it. So we do see some element of, I mean, there's already evidence of that. It's out in the public, it's in Twitter, and that sort of fits in with a long-standing tradition within the ruling alliance of stigmatizing minority racial groups. So there is some of that there, but I completely agree with Professor Sierpe. If you look at violent protest data coming from the SAPS, it's on average 10 violent protests per day in South Africa before the pandemic, and that was 3 times higher than a decade before. So we've seen increasing lawlessness. It's become increasingly normalized. If you look at xenophobic attacks, the South African Migration Project shows that although there are these hotspot incidents, 2019, 17, 11, 2008, where the media covers it a lot, more foreigners are killed in xenophobic attacks outside of those incidents, 1 here, 2 there, 3 there, than when you have the big mass looting and burning attacks. So the background noise of South Africa is of violence, it's of lawlessness, and it is of a ruling alliance that stigmatizes people on the basis of race. So I think all of those factors come together, and insofar as we seek solutions, it's got to be in dealing with the number one problem that most South Africans identify, according to polls commissioned by the Institute of Race Relations, and that is unemployment. Unemployment is the crisis. Most young men my age and younger don't have a job. that puts people in a very sort of frustrated position. That anger boils, and then you just need a spark to light the powder keg.
Professor Sierpe, you made mention of some of the loopholes, saying that the one thing that's pretty clear coming out of these protests is that South Africa definitely needs to up their game when it comes to intelligence. But what are some of the factors that need to be considered when it comes to the reasons why South African police services were not as prepared as they should have been, especially considering some of the budgetary constraints and also looking at the absence of, what's happened since Richard Mdluli left his position?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is to establish a dialogue between the governors and the governed, which has not happened. If you look at what the ANC has been busy with and the ruling party, it has been witch hunting against those that they consider to be the losers of its electoral politics. And that has been, the energy has been focused on that. And when you have somebody coming in and talking about the new dawn, you actually start creating a sense of hope. And then for the last 3 years, the people do not feel that they are part of the agenda of anything. Most of the reports has been battles, not so much how we are going to address the issues. And even when that is put on the table, what people present are dreams. We dream of smart cities. People are not interested in smart cities and smart trains. What they're interested in is cities that are functioning. They're interested in trains that work, as Busa also indicated to the president when he came with his dreams. So this is an issue that people do not see, that they are actually a factor. They actually don't see them being taken seriously by the ruling elite. So that is one thing that we need to start having a discussion around. Then yes, even the police, use of brute force has never worked. What we need to do, yes, in terms of having a dialogue with citizens, citizens will start protecting their own and the property. I mean, as we've seen in various spaces where people are saying, but we are the ones who are going to suffer. This is a type of discussion that the citizens must have. So you find also a weakness within the NGO and civil service sector, whereas in the past you had these leadership, but all of them seem to have been drawn into the factional battles of the ANC. So I do think that the first thing that we need to do is to have a dialogue, and that dialogue must not go towards a delegitimization of people's concerns. It must not, we must also condemn violence, even when it is perpetrated against the people you do not like. Like I gave you an example of Supra. Ramaphosa had to leave the United Kingdom where there was a meeting to rush to Mafeking. We didn't hear the police saying we're going to investigate the instigators and all that. So let us put facts on the table to say these are our problems as a country, and let's start saying we are going to take one from the other. But also, don't tell us that when people express their anger at what they see as injustice, then you want to delegitimize it. People in this country have been brutalized and don't know when the system is unjust. They are always willing to accept even the outcomes that are not favorable. But where you have a situation that we have, where, as I say, and I keep on repeating it, you have two judges of Constitutional Court who have also expressed disgust against their own colleagues to an extent to say the decision that they've taken is not only unlawful, it's also unconstitutional. So the people who also feel that they are not crazy. Otherwise, we must actually say those judges are also crazy. So the problem is there's been arrogance within the state at the political level, at the state level. That's why they claim to be unprepared, because their focus has not been on the people, on taking the country forward. It has been on how many of the people we can deal with politically. And what we're now having is a scapegoating. Even those 2,500, you'll find that they'll be little kids. What benefit are you going to gain in terms of dealing with them? And I'm not too sure that using brute force and appeal, as has happened, where people have actually come out to say, guys, let us stop. This is our country. This is the attitude we must take. But we've been brutalized long enough. And let's not have a situation where people see the police as enemies, where they see the defense force as an enemy. What we need to do is to find a dialogue, to create a dialogue that should actually happen within the people and the police force and the defense, but to simply use brute force. We've seen our people being treated like animals, being pushed, walking naked like animals, like baboons. Those images bring back the sense that we still have to deal with the issue of racial injustice. And that's the issue that people want to know. The people need hope. And if you're not going to give them hope, you are going to end up with this lawlessness. And let's not just pretend. Violent protest has become a norm in this country and has been perpetrated also by some of the unions when they march out there, the adults and the young people see that. And address the issue of youth unemployment, which is big. And some of us, when we were in government, we tried to deal with it, where we came up with a National Youth Service, where the military could provide the young people with skills so that they can actually create their own jobs. So we have capabilities that are lying fallow, unutilized.
Absolutely. And very lastly, Gabriel, let's wrap things off with you just giving us your overall conclusion. I mean, we heard Police Minister Begitela spokesperson Leranzo Temba speaking about what the task was for the police minister, saying that, they're going into Phoenix to rebuild relationships that were broken. And we also heard President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday saying that he is in KwaZulu-Natal to encourage police officers and the SANDF to go into those volatile areas and find some sort of solution. What will it take to rebuild those broken relationships?
It's going to take time, it's going to take some goodwill, and it's going to take some money, and it's going to take a serious effort at cleaning house. I think that earlier in your show I saw reference to the dislocation between President Ramaphosa's actions and his words. His words are great, his actions not so much. The fact that the police and the army and the intelligence services were caught so flat-footed would, in any country we would like to compare ourselves to, result in people resigning in shame or in people being dismissed by the president. We haven't seen any of that. We see a lot of words, but not a lot of genuine accountability. And I think that it's important when talking about genuine accountability and that culture or that normalization of violent protests across not just this area and not just one sector and not just one province, but really across the country. I think one of the things that concerns me most is the president's talk about going after the instigators. Now, that's a very good place to start. But it's also very important to go after the looters. Everyone who's broken the law should be brought to book. If you see 20 billion rand in excess in damages, thousands of shops looted, over 100 lives lost, some of them may be lost because defenders killed gratuitously. Everyone who broke the law must be brought to book. It's only in that way, unfortunately, because we're all fallen angels. All people have their selfish tendencies. It's only by having the sense of law and order, the sense that if I do wrong, even if it's stealing a TV, even if it's shooting someone in a crowd where I think no one's looking, even in such situations, the law will come after me and I'll be prosecuted and I'll be given due process. But if I'm found guilty, then I'm going to go behind bars. So it's not good enough to scapegoat. It's not good enough to go after one or two political agents that have become unpopular. It's very important to really respect equality before the law, really respect rule of law, which means pushing away some of the laws on our agenda that disrespect property rights, but also imposing law and order, which means accountability from the top to the bottom, leaving no steps out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, let me thank you for your time. The University of Zululand's political analyst, Professor Sipho Sierpe, and Head of Communications at the Institute for Race Relations, Gabriel Crouse. Thank you for your time.